Colorado Department of Corrections has undergone dramatic changes during the past 60 years. From the early lockstep days and silent system to the abolition of corporal punishment, which was the practice of whipping a convict over a wooden horse known as the old gray mare. Prisons, inmates, and prison philosophy, like the old gray mare, ain't what they used to be. In this documentary, Saul Zlochower, a retired New York City Police Department detective and criminal justice professor, interviewed current inmates, staff, and retired staff of the Colorado Department of Corrections. Also included in this video are rare black and white excerpts from the 1948 film Canon City. The film factually documents the December 30th, 1947 prison escape. Warden Roy Best portrayed himself. In 1932, Roy Best, known as the Cowboy Warden, was appointed warden of the Colorado State Penitentiary. At age 32, he was the youngest warden in any state or federal penitentiary. He served as warden for 20 years.
The warden of a penal institution has a grave responsibility. Absolute control over the lives and futures of hundreds of men. To the tough-minded, he must be tougher. To those who show promise and a desire to make good again in society, he must be understanding. Meet Warden Roy Best.
How are you?
Fine, thanks.
Have a chair.
Thank you, I will.
I knew Roy Best quite well prior to my coming to work at the institution on the outside, and he fancied himself as being quite a cowboy, and I was connected with some ranch work around here, and if you really liked Roy Best, well, you sure had a taste for roughness, because he was tough. But if he liked you, he did one thing, gave you a hat, but he's the only one that could wear it. He had the biggest head I ever saw in my life. But he was quite a character. He was a good roper. He liked to rope.
My first involvement with the prison was through some sociology classes that I had at Denver University when I met Roy Best about 1948. Had an occasion to be down here and was introduced, and we had a lecture by him, and it was kind of an interesting day because somehow I got behind the class, and they had all gathered in his office. And I came walking in a little late, and I was introduced to him, and I walked up to his desk to shake hands, and he told me stop. And at that time I noted that there was a large Doberman, and he started to rear up when I approached the desk. So I backed off a bit, but then the dog calmed down, and we had a very, very nice discussion. And those were interesting days back then, because although Best was declared to be a very severe disciplinarian, he really opened up the institution. There was a lot of involvement of civilians in the institution, tours, curio work going on in the prison, which was kind of startling to a lot of other prison wardens around the country.
He really enjoyed playing jokes. In spite of it, he was a tough administrator, very tough. But he really had fun sometimes. And he would prearrange with certain inmates, and he'd say, and I'll let you know when I come in with a dignitary. And then you come up, and this inmate would come up and say to the dignitary, I hear that you're trying to date my wife, and I want it stopped. I want to stop now.
Warden Best always had a good crowd at an execution. I was here one time when they were getting ready for an execution, and he threatened to subpoena me to stay for it, and I escaped and got out, but they were executing a man from Colorado Springs. I thought that there were at least 300 people came into that execution. And the old chamber just had a little stack on it. So when you're talking about Bob Atkinson talking about exuding that gas from there, the hazards of 200 or 300 people standing around that gas chamber, and kicking that gas out into the air. If you'd ever had an inversion, you'd kill 200 or 300 people up there.
Maybe Roy didn't invite his friends.
That was a little humorous side of it, and that was the way it appeared to me when he threatened to subpoena me one night to be there, and I didn't want to be.
There had been an inmate escape from one of the farms, and off-duty officers were sent out on the countryside to hunt and try to find this inmate. And when the day shift officers had their day's work in, they were sent out to, some of them were sent out to relieve the ones that were hunting. About 10 or 11 o'clock that night, there was a lady called Warden Roy Best and said that my husband is out on an inmate hunt, and he hasn't returned. It's getting late, and I'm worried about him. And Warden Roy Best said, well, sorry, I can't help you. There has been no escape.
Roy Best, I knew him at that time, but I knew him as more or less a child that used to come down here and play football out in the park with Buddy Best. And it's funny that he brings up the Dobermans, although they were very vicious dogs, and they've been told that they bit officers as well as inmates that got out of line. We used to come down the park and they would play football with us. And the dogs would actually take us down, but we never did get bit. Roy Best, as I remember him, was a person that you kind of looked at him and you were, as a child, you kind of feared him. But then again, he was, I don't know, he was very friendly to the kids, always seemed to know who you were, and he always seemed to be welcomed around. I knew him from the rodeo, and from what we had here was a trail ride. And of course my father worked here before that, so I would say I started coming in and out of the penitentiary in the early 40s.
So you did see him and at least heard of him or heard stories about your dad tell about him?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Any worthwhile?
My dad, he liked him. He was a person that you knew exactly what he expected. From talking with inmates that had done time under him, they knew exactly what they could do and exactly what would happen if they violated him, any of his rules or his regulations, and they had a great respect and a great fear for the man.
Fear is a constant companion to inmates and staff. A person's chance of becoming a victim of an assault or homicide is greater in prison than in the free world. Strength and cunning are the two ingredients which inmates respect. Inmates, male or female, are judged on how well they can defend themselves and how much they can get away with without being caught.
Did you ever see any serious physical assaults on inmates on inmates in the institution? I'm sure that you have.
A couple that comes to mind real fast is we had an inmate that was murdered in the old Central building. It was over drugs, and they cut him up so bad that, in fact, they cut his head almost off, and we had to put him in a plastic bag. He had so many holes in him so we could get him out the door for the coroner. There's another individual that's still doing time. This was also one of the drug things, and they took a knife and they stripped all of his muscles out in his legs and his arms, and so that they thought they would render him a cripple. But he got up and he was able to function, and through rehabilitation he's able to move around now. There's been inmates that they've been burned. You know, gasoline's been thrown in their cell, or their light bulb was filled with gas that exploded. All the meat came off their body. They fell from the 3rd or 4th floor down. Individuals have fallen off the 4th tier, splattered their heads. There's been all kinds of assaults, murders, and just really some brutal cases of assault inside this old prison that I've seen through the years.
When you overcrowd and create a real artificial surroundings and environment while you induce violence.
Sometimes you have situations where you have no other alternative but a violent situation, a violent end to your confrontation. Other times it doesn't take that. Sometimes it just takes telling, look, just get away from me, stay away from me. Like me, when I came in, I was 17 years old. Well, you know, you put a 17-year-old white boy in a maximum security penitentiary, there could be problems.
Were you hit on? Or?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The first day, the bars on my cell were filled up, but I let it be known. I let it be known. But I let it know. The first day I was back there, they just put me in a cell and locked the door, and then they let the yard in. They brought the yard in, and that's when we were, Sunday at the zoo, is what it was. But
fish.
yeah, and 17-year-old boy, they say, hey, fresh meat, But the next day when I got out, it came on, it started. Well, I downed one guy then. I just hit him in the mouth and told him then to stay away from me, or we'll go farther. And it just gradually, from there, it just gradually slacked off. It didn't go after that, because they saw, once they see strength, like Tom said, once they see strength, if they see strength in you, they're not going to give you the confrontation.
Sometimes we would have younger inmates come in, and they would become almost victims of the confirmed homosexuals in the institution. And we had an older woman who did a lot of yard work and outside work, and if we received a real vulnerable type of young inmate, we would call her in and we would say, we have a yard helper for you. And she knew exactly what we meant, and people didn't mess with that young inmate. They left her alone.
How about tough inmates? You ever
I've seen my share of them that thought they were tough, but most of them are buried. There's been a lot of different types of inmates in this penitentiary, what we call the bullies and everything, and the gangs and so forth, in all the years I've been here. But overall, tough guys always wind up with a blade in them, just like they've done to other people, too.
You had some tough characters back in the older days.
Older days, yes. I mean, when you walk down a tier in them days, you just walk straight. You never look nowhere. You don't see anything. It was just like the three blind mice. That's the way you do your time.
Do you have property here in the prison?
Oh, yeah, I have my stuff.
How would you feel if I took it from you?
If I knew it was, you'd probably die.
If you knew it was me, you'd kill me.
Yeah.
It's that valuable.
Because nobody's going to take my stuff.
You have to understand there's a code that we live by.
What's that?
Well, there's a code that you handle your own affairs, you live on your own, you do your own, you don't hear nothing, you don't see nothing, you don't say nothing, and nobody likes a cell-house thief.
One thing that I think should be said, too, is that there's an awful lot of problems and confrontations and differences between people in here, and we live in very tight conditions, and there's a lot more negotiation and communication and solving things without resorting to violence than anybody gives credit for, I think. Someone will come to me or one of these other old-timers around here and say, hey man, I'm really having a problem with this guy over here, can you talk to him, or what can we do, and there's an awful lot of that goes on, and I think it's important that that be brought out too.
As tough as inmates are, the staff could be tougher. In many instances, the staff's toughness was tempered with compassion and fairness.
How about tough correctional officers?
Bill Wilson and Chet Yo.
Chet Yo?
Chester Yo. Came to work here in 29.
Right after the riot, right.
And he was, we just called him. He was a senior captain or something.
Well, when he retired, he was associate warden of custody.
But he was probably, he and Bill, the two toughest men I ever worked around, or four. But they were tough. There's no other explanation for it.
He was known as Bigfoot Yo?
He put a foot in your ass.
How did he do that?
He'd be talking in line. That's when he used to have that silent system. If he seen you talking, he'd come up behind you and nail you. He'd lift you off the ground.
What did you do?
No, I didn't do nothing. I've seen it done.
Was Yo ever injured?
A couple of guys commandeered a truck out there at Midway in about 1937 or something like that. And they were driving down toward the west gate. They were going to crash out through the wall, and Chester run out there and jumped on the running board. And one of them allegedly had a zip gun and shot him back here on the side of the neck and the head. And he didn't let that deter him from his duty. He got them and beat their ass and hauled their ass down to the hole.
Captain Yo is the only man I know that had a very unique way of breaking a strike, especially sit-down strike. We had him on a labor gang. He was in charge of the labor crew. Well, he wasn't really in charge of it, but he was running it. And we decided to go on strike. He says, okay, that's fine. So we went down to the kitchen and got a bunch of number 10 cans and cut the tops and the bottoms out. Brought them up, and that's what we got to sit on all day. Let me tell you, it's uncomfortable. It really is.
Solve the strike?
Very rapidly, yes. There was no more strike after that.
Were you ever injured as a correctional officer?
Yes, I was. Yes, I was stabbed in Cell House 3 trying to put an inmate back into a cell.
Where were you stabbed?
I was stabbed down through my arm and across my chest. It went through my arm.
Were you ever hit by any inmates?
Numbers of times. I have scars all over my poor little head where I've been hit with pieces of metal, soap, whatever they could get, fists, my nose been broke, numbers of times.
Bill was the yard lieutenant, and I was lieutenant in charge of Cell House 3 where this happened. And this inmate named Julius Jones had told me all week he was going to stab me on a Saturday or Sunday. I was on a weekend, I know that. And so we had the shakedown crew come in and go through the whole cell house and didn't come up with a thing. Turned out that when he was supposed to stab me, it was my day off, and Bill relieved me in Cell House 3, and that's when he got stabbed. Remember that, Bill?
Yeah, sure did, yeah.
Fear is a common denominator in an institution, a penal institution. I think the key to it is overcoming fear. And you're looking at a group here who have the ability, if they were fearful, they overcame it.
The desire for inmates to leave their sterile environment for the freedom of society is an ongoing obsession. Although escapes are uncommon, they do occur. Many times, escapes end in death or injury to the inmate or to the staff member. 2 major breaks resulting in multiple deaths and injuries occurred in 1929 and 1947. In the 1929 escape, 8 guards were executed by inmates and 5 inmates committed suicide. The film Canon City, starring Scott Brady, who portrayed convicted killer James Sherbondi, was based on the 1947 escape in which 2 inmates were killed and where many guards and inmates were injured.
McNulty speaking. What? No, there's no hill gang on tonight. Why should there be?
McNulty, there's been a break. 12 men gone. Joe Gray nearly killed.
Get me the warden.
The dread sound of the prison whistle announcing a break, warning Canon City. The people hurry for their homes, to protect their families, to prepare for whatever may be coming. For the blast of that whistle always means trouble.
This was the 47 escape. I think there were 12 inmates that escaped. They came out through at about Pike Avenue, and I was living on Pike Avenue at the time, and my son was about 12 years old, 12, 13, and he was delivering papers. He had a Daily Record paper route, and it was kind of stormy, and he'd throw a paper and blow a whistle. And the inmates heard that whistle, and they said, "There are the cops now," and they turned some of the hostages loose.
My dad was working in a hospital at that time, and of course, as a brat, why, I would go in and out of the penitentiary down there just about like an employee. And Smalley was one of them that got shot through the lower back and came down out through the scrotum. And I'll never forget him. He's laying in there and just smiling, just like nothing had happened, you know. So it was rather interesting. And the filming of the movie later, I got to meet all those people because I was a bellhop. But that was an interesting escape.
Yeah, through the years there have been numbers of escapes that I've been involved with. I would venture to say at least 100 different escapes. Yeah, we had 8 of them go out, and I captured a couple in the house down the road. In fact, I shot one of them through the leg, through the meaty part of the leg. It didn't hurt him too bad because the police officer had already shot him in the other leg, and it hurt much worse than I did.
At that time, I was a security manager, and Jerry Cox was a captain, and we decided, well, hey, while they're doing a count, let's just walk down the ditch. We pulled the first ones out of the ditch, and then we started searching around for more, and we was going through this house, and so I'm coming in through the back door, and I'm scared because I know what these people are that ran away, and all of a sudden I hear this shot. And the only thing that I can think of is, my God, they've killed Bill. So I run through the house and I run upstairs, and there's Bill standing on top of the bed in there, and he's hollering for help up there because he's got them laying all over the floor. And that's when he made that one shot. And this poor guy that was in there, he got shot through the leg and didn't even know it. He was so scared of Bill.
How did the inmates get out to that ditch?
They got a snorkel and got a piece of plastic tubing from the infirmary, from our hospital area, and they got the hacksaw blades, and they would work under the water. And there was a set of bars that go through the old hydraulic ditch there to stop escapes, and they just in fact sawed out a couple of bars and went on through and floated down to a block down the street from this, down on First Street.
Back in '71, 2 of the people on death row got out of their cells and climbed the wall down here just a little bit south of us, and as they got on the top of the wall, we had a residence down here that the associate warden for custody lived, and he came out and seen this one on top of the wall and was about to get over, shot him, fell on the ground, and the other one was shot by a tower officer. And that was during a very active time in Canon City, Blossom Day Festival, and the town was just packed with people, just loaded with people. If they'd have gotten over the wall, it would have been quite a situation.
Ever think about leaving here?
I tried to, not here, no, I tried to leave from the county jail.
How?
Well, we took a couple of officers hostage and tied them up, and then we proceeded to try to get out of the county jail. It didn't work very well.
A very prominent physician now outside. He came into the institution when he was 15 years old, and so we tried to kind of protect him from the mainstream of the prison, and he dyed a pair of underwear, long-handled underwear, into a frogman suit, and went over his head and just left his face sticking out. He got a snorkel tube and a hacksaw, and he started to saw the bars, which were about 1.5 inches in diameter, under the water. But he lost his snorkel tube and had to surface, and he surfaced at the same time one of the officers was there at the west gate to send food up to the tower. And of course this prisoner surfacing out of the water with just his white face and the black like scared the officer to death. And he was only 15, 16 years old at the time.
And he's a physician today?
Yes.
Is that right? What was he in for?
Murder. He killed his father and his mother.
These 2 women climbed out over the fence right in the broad daylight and got away. And we didn't miss them until the afternoon count. Then these women had waited until dark and got out on the highway and were out there thumbing a ride, trying to get out of town. Well, it just happened that our officers were the ones who stopped and picked them up. And when they saw who had picked them up, they just gave up. And they came, when they brought them back to the institution, they just came in tired and dirty and hungry, and they said, "Lock us up."
How long have you been here?
I came here when I was 23, convicted of murder.
And you got life?
I got death. 4 hours before I was to die in the gas chamber, the warden got my sentence commuted.
There have been 77 executions in Colorado from 1890 to 1967. 45 convicts met their fate by hanging, which ended in 1933. From 1933 to 1967, the gas chamber was the means of execution used in Colorado. Luis Monge was the last person executed on June 2nd, 1967. Currently, there are 3 men on death row.
Kind of opposed to the capital punishment, but I didn't have any problem with carrying it out. It was the will of the people, and I always considered that everybody had their hands on the lever anyway, the people that voted for it, so I had no problem with it whatsoever.
The thing that frightened me, it was part of my job to make sure that the chamber was cleared after the execution, because there was people, Bill Wilson, one of them, that had to go in there to remove that person after the execution. And it was very, very complicated and sophisticated to clear the chamber with ammonia. But Warden Patterson was such a perfectionist that I don't know how many dry runs we had on that, but we sure got tired of coming down here. You remember, Bill? There was 4 or 5 anyway.
It's an aura of the prison. It was rainy that night, lightning and thunder, and all of the elements of a good old monster movie of some kind that particular night. The prisoner who suffered from asthma did say that in a very loud stage voice that he asked the doctor if he said, will this gas bother my asthma? And the doctor, after quite a waiting period of time and this kind of a shaky voice, said, not for long.
Was his attitude generally calm?
The prisoner he was full of guilt, and he was wanting to be executed. He wasn't resisting execution at all. He had killed a portion of his family, and I think he was guilt-ridden and at times close to being suicidal himself. So he didn't resist the execution. In fact, I think that was why the remark that he made.
With the exception of federal and state minimum security prisons, the majority of prisons are bleak, sterile, colorless, and frightening. Yet, behind the walls, the barbed wire and the tower guns, and in spite of the fear, there is some humor.
You must have some inmates with interesting stories in here.
Well, we think we have. Let's go in and meet some of them.
They used to have what they call the adjustment center. The first 4 cells were for death row, and the other ones down there, I think it was up to 21, were for disciplinary reasons. And they brought this one guy in for being drunk, and they caught him behind a cow, you know. You know what I mean? They caught him behind a cow anyway.
Committing the crime of bestiality.
Yeah.
Trying to get some relief.
Yeah, well, they caught him. He got relief too, but they caught him and they brought him down there. And it was during lunch. They brought him in and they were passing out trays and they missed him. They missed him, and he kept raising hell. You know, why they didn't bring his chow. You know. Then finally they come down with a bale of hay. They threw it there, and he was asking, what the hell was this? And he says, well, what's good enough for your girlfriend up there is good enough for you, too. You know?
What about Midway Millie?
What about her?
Yeah, tell me about her. What was
She had
like?
a thing for Turner.
Turner was a correctional officer.
Yeah.
I heard it, but tell me about it. What would Midway Millie do to Turner?
Embarrass the hell out of him.
At every opportunity.
How?
Come up behind him and wait till the visitors came by and then run her hands up where it didn't belong and kiss him on the ear in front of the visitors.
Now, Midway Millie was a male homosexual.
Yes.
So we all know who Midway Millie was. Yeah.
Oh, you would have had a hard time convincing Midway that she was a male.
That bad?
Well, that good, depending on which side of it you were on.
Did you know Mud Puppy?
Yeah, I knew Mud Puppy. It figures somebody had asked me about Mud Puppy.
Tell me about Mud Puppy.
I can't tell you anything about Mud Puppy. All I know was a weightlifting, yeah.
Very nice guy.
Very nice guy. That's a very good way to put it, yeah. The only guy I knew that lifted weights and crocheted.
There were several strange people in here. One of them, if he didn't like a job, would go stupid on him and do things that were very strange in order to get out from the job. And they finally figured out the only place for him was they put him out in charge of the chicken farm. And they went out, I think it was about a week later, and he killed all 6,000 chickens. I mean, just... And they asked him why, and he said something about him keeping him or waking him up in the morning. As far as I know, this guy is still running around the system someplace, so I'm not using any names. But there have been some very weird people in here.
Weird? There's a lot of weird people in there, so they wouldn't have a prison if there wasn't.
That's one way.
We had one guy, he was arrested on an immigration charge and a robbery charge, and they extradited him to Mexico, and about 2 days before he was ready to leave, they found out he was going around stealing all the parakeets and making burritos out of them and selling them. And so, I mean, you know, fresh burrito, and there was nobody going to buy a burrito under any circumstances from anybody. About 4 of the guys that lost birds that got a hold of him before he left, so he left with crutches. But, you know, strange people.
He was locked up over in cell house 3, and he liked real nice, you know. They get ready to bring him his tray, and he says, "Cressman, you gonna act crazy today?" "Oh, no, officer, I'm gonna be real nice today." "Okay, now, here's your tray." So they slide it under the door, you understand? And he take the tray. He said, "Oh, officer, can I take a shower today?" "Oh, sure, Cressman, you acting real nice today." So he go and eat, and he come back, pick his tray up. "Can I pick the tray up? You ain't got nothing to throw on me, have you?" "No, I don't have anything to throw on you. I want a shower." So we take the tray out, and he says, "Be back in half an hour." Half an hour, come back around, and he have a big cup full, a bowl, you know, and he done sit
waste.
Yeah, piss and shit.
Yeah.
And when they get ready in front of his door, he was smacking at him, hit him right in the face with it.
What?
And that was funny, man.
Funny. What did the officer do?
He was pissed. He had to go home, you know, for the day. He was pissed his whole day up.
And what would they do to the inmate?
Oh, they come in there with the water hose and put it on him, you know. He got that coming, you know.
Water hose?
Water him down, you know.
That's all?
Or either put some tear gas in there on him, you know. He gonna pay for that, you know.
Did you know Cotton?
Yes, I knew him.
And his bride, Sue Lyon?
Sue Lyon, the actress. I remember in the visiting room, I had a visit one time, and I had seen her. I didn't know her personally.
Mm-hmm.
But like I say, I did know him, and I had seen her.
What were the stories going around the prison about him and Sue?
Well, I guess he was just getting what he could.
Right there in the visiting room?
Oh, well, you could do that if you knew how to do it. Let me put it that way. He used to people, you know, you could block for each other if you had a visit.
We had a couple of offices set aside for inmate lawyer conferences that couldn't be overheard or anything like that. She convinced some parole officer that she was a counselor at the LA jail and was following up with this man, and so they brought him up and gave him a private office and everything like that. And when we finally observed what kind of interview it was, I think I called Bill, and that's when those were stopped real fast.
One phrase that we started back when she was here, and she was the cause of it, and that was always concerned about dress code. And so the phrase that went into the dress code was that you could not wear see-through garments without a non-see-through undergarment. And she was the cause of that statement. She married Cotton Adams, was the man's name that she married. That was just one of the minute problems that I think the facility went through with Sue Lyons and Cotton Adams.
She would come in with see-through garments?
Yeah, I saw a couple of them, and I mean, it was really see-through.
Sue Lyon was actually married in the prison to an inmate, and it was a full dress wedding. It was authorized by the then warden, acting warden at that time. We were under a grand jury investigation, as a matter of fact, at that time. And we had a big ceremony there with tux and bridal gowns and the whole bit, and a big cake came in. And some of us, Bill Wilson and a few of us, thought, well, there's something fishy about that cake. We don't trust this at all. So we subjected it to the metal detector, and the metal detector goes wild. And subsequently, we finally decided we'd x-ray the cake. Well, as it turned out, the cake was relatively neutral. The only thing that rang the bell was some the tier plates between the different tiers of the cake had actually initiated the metal detector. So we had a good cake, and
how did it taste?
It tasted pretty good.
I had a kind of a secret weapon when I was in there for reformation of prisoners. Over in Cell House 3 that they were talking about, Bill Wilson and Bob Atkinson were talking about, that was the segregation unit in the punishment area, and the mental cases were all over there. And they had a great big black. It was about 6'7" tall and weighed about 245 pounds, who was severely mentally ill. He talked all the time, that he was awake, and he was awake most of the time. And it was a blathering, blithering talk that made no sense particularly. And we had to handle him with Atkinson and Bill Wilson and gas usually to ever get him back in the cell if he even came out to take a shower. And we got him, and so I said, there's 7 fighters, very tough Hispanics that had been in a fight out in the big yard. There was 14 of them locked up on 2 different tiers. So I said, put old John over with the Hispanics in that extra cell over there. And so they wrestled him over there, got him in the cell, and he talked. And it wasn't 3 days till the Hispanics called for the warden. So I went over there, and by God, they were going to kill him, they were going to emasculate him, they were going to burn him out, and they were going to do this, that he talked all night and all day. And I had talked to him before and trying to get some assurance that there wouldn't be trouble if I let him out in the general population. Nothing there, they were just hard customers. But 3 days of him talking day and night, and they begged to get out of there. And finally we gave them an extra week, I guess, and then let them out, and they kept their word.
This may not sound like something funny, but there was one guy in here who an awful lot of people didn't like. And there was a variety of reasons why he wasn't liked, but he wasn't liked by a lot of people. And they kept trying to kill him. And no one could succeed. He got thrown off the hill, got up and walked away from it. He's standing out in the yard one day. A guy took a run at him from about 20 foot away and run a shank clear through him all the way from the back to the front. And he walked very, very carefully all the way to the midway, and they took him down to the hospital and took the knife out of him. 2 days later, he was back out running around the yard again. As far as I know, there were at least 4 or 5 attempts on this guy's life during the time he was here. Nobody ever succeeded. I mean, charmed existence some kind of way.
I'm surprised with all the experts you have in here.
It wasn't for lack of trying, what can I say?
I got busted behind the walls one time coming out of the kitchen with a sheet pan, all right, with a sheet pan of those cherry donuts, those dry cherry rolls. And Captain Green was running the Midway at that time. Come on. And he caught me. Now, Captain Green's been around for a long time, and he busted me. He says, come here. So I walk over, and I go back over to the Midway. He says, sit down on the back porch of the Midway, and he says, eat every one of them.
How many were there?
Well, let's see, there's 48 in the sheet pan, aren't there? 40, and he didn't give no coffee. And no coffee. Can I have a drink, Cap? No, can't have a drink. Eat the rolls. And I, you know, but that was the way it was back then. I never stole nothing out of the kitchen again, I'll tell you that.
Over at Shadow Mountain, Unit 3, they have 16 people in a pod there. And they bring these meals on wheels, these little carts things, and they feed people. And so one of the rules that they have instituted over there is that you must eat out in the day room area off the tables that are set into the cement. You can't take your tray and go into your room and eat. So this guy was having an ongoing problem with another guy that lived there in the pod. And so rather than get out here and get into a confrontation in the chow hall, he was just taking his tray and going in his room and eating. And so the officer come along and noticed this and gave him a report for violation of the rule of taking his tray to his room and eating. And this rule was allegedly a violation of the health code because there was a commode in the room too close to where his table was. Okay, so they took him to the little kangaroo court that they have, and they found him guilty of this violation of the rule. And his punishment was that they fed him in his room for 10 days.
The greatest change in prisons occurred during the 1960s and 1970s, partially as a result of United States Supreme Court decisions. Have these court decisions and changes helped or hurt our prison system? Have modern changes in social values and institutional operations affected inmates and staff? Could Warden Roy Best or persons of his era work and survive in today's institutions?
Would you like to see him as director of the DOC today?
Well, no. Back then he was probably considered the top warden probably in the United States or around. But that was a different era. Probably Roy Best, my father, and probably many of the rest of them could not function in the facilities today.
Why not?
Well, because of the change of society and the radical change of how the prisons were run in those days.
You think some of the Supreme Court decisions maybe help make a change?
They might have made some of the change. I think change in prison is like change in any business. It's from the clientele you get, and the society has changed. Example that I always like to use is when I started to work here, if you got caught with an Esquire magazine, you were in trouble.
The inmate caught with Esquire?
Yes, they just weren't allowed in, and now, of course, why, just any type of magazine can just about get in, as long as it doesn't show you how to make bombs or something.
Warden Best's period of time, he took charge after a very, very disastrous riot in 1929. He had to assume not only control of an institution, but he had to assume control of a disordered, difficult institution. And he adopted, and it was in practice over the United States, both the reformatory and the prison, used corporal punishment as an internal control in the institution. Terrifically brutal, if you ever saw it or saw the results of it, which I have.
The Grey Mare was by far the worst punishment that was ever at the prison. And I know I was here, I was only employed about 2 months when I first witnessed this, and I will not describe it, but I was appalled at the severity of this punishment. And I think it was by far the worst punishment that an inmate ever got.
You know, what lockup used to be in years ago as far as hold time goes. I mean, you're guilty, and first thing you did, they throw you in the hole. With the cell house 1 was a lock tank, then they had cell house 3. And the minimum was 10 days, 23 days, or 36 days. Plus, they had what they call the dog cages, and you might get 60 days or 90 days or 6 months or a year over there. It all depends on what you did to get over there. 10 days, bread and spinach twice a day. 3 slices of bread, a bowl of spinach. No mattress, just a cement block, 1 pair of cloth shoes and a pair of coveralls. And if you got 10 days, you wore the same clothes. If you had 23 days, you'd had to wear the same clothes. If you had 36 days, you don't get no shower, no nothing. You just stay in there, and on the 11th day, you'd get fed 3 meals a day for 3 days. And then they'd come and take your mattress away and give you back that blanket, and you'd stay, and that's what you did. How many people in here today could do that kind of whole time?
Did you ever get the hole?
Oh, I've had my share of about 18 months over there in Cell House 3 when they first opened that place. And right up above you was death row. And you could holler up through the ventilator, and the guys that used to be up in death row. So you'd work one of the windows out, get some tobacco down. If you got caught, you got another 10 more days.
You took the chance for the tobacco?
I got an extra 10. I did 36, and then I had to do 10 more, so I did 46 just to get some tobacco down in there.
Would they let you have any tobacco?
Oh, no. You don't even get a bar of soap, let alone anything else in there. Nothing.
At one time, you know, the warden was pretty much the sole disciplinarian, and then we got into hearings, and then we got into a much more due process procedure where you have to give notice and so forth. But in my experience, we're still disciplining those people who have done something wrong in the institution. Occasionally, like in the justice system, something goes wrong and the work doesn't get done right, and maybe somebody gets put in the hole for something wrong. But I can remember back, we talked about Chet Yo, our senior captain and a social warden of custody, and I can recall him when he found a shred of evidence that would look like somebody was innocent of a particular offense, he would just haul off over to Cell House 3 and release them. There wasn't any due process when he felt that somebody had been done an injustice, and they'd get their time back and so forth. Nowadays, you've got an appeal process and everything to go through.
It's true. We did take the inmates, and if they were accused of something, why, you would take them out of population, and the next morning they'd meet the disciplinary board. And it was a very simple process. Did you or did you not break the law or the rule? And the penalty was issued right now. And they understood that. Appeals, they could write a letter of appeal, and maybe somebody would come along, like Captain Yo. If he said, well, wait a minute, you guys made a bad decision, he turned it loose. And he made that decision right now. It wasn't 30 days, it wasn't wait around. Right now, if we write a disciplinary report on a person, and I'm telling you the inmate's angle on it, is that it's a game. It's no longer, did you break the rule? It is, are all the officers and the hearings officer and everything else, are they going by the procedure and the rules to make me do the penalty? I think that's got to change sometime. People have to answer for their action, and I think that we'll go back to it.
How about the administration here? What do you think of the administration now as compared to, and I'm not speaking about any specific person, I'm just generalizing about the administration now compared to when you were here years ago? Or maybe you don't want to answer for fear of retribution.
You want to see they keep me here, don't you?
No.
Most of our old-timers say, I'm not an inmate, I'm a convict. They don't like to be associated with the new look.
No, I don't think they have prisoners like they had in them days. There's a change of people. The convicts today, we're called inmates. And in them days, there were convicts that were men.
What are you getting in today?
Today, there's a mixture of all different kinds of them. You know, there's, what can you say about them? I mean, I'm not going to be putting anybody, belittling any more than myself, because, I mean, I'm not proud of being in here or what I've done either, but it's still, there's not inmates today like there was before.
Would you say today they're younger and more drug-oriented?
The percentage of them, yes. There's more, I would say, drug users than there was in back in the 50s.
Are they more violent?
I don't think so, no.
When I got down here, there was convicts, and you learned. You learned the rules, you learned how to conduct yourself, you learned how to walk, you learned how to talk, and what was expected, not only of you, but every other person in here. If you didn't, there were things that happened. And as Val has pointed out, the ratio of convicts now, if there's a handful of convicts left in the institution, any of them, it's remarkable. Most of them are inmates, and the distinction being, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I know, convict is a person that knows how to do time, get what he needs accomplished without making waves. An inmate is somebody that wants to cry and snivel about the 3 months they've got to do and how terrible it is that they can't have color television, or that they can't have furloughs on weekends, instead of taking care of what needs to be taken care of, which is the here and now.
People in here want things, and crybabies, we call them, and snitches is the way this joint is run today. I mean, no matter what you do, you got to make sure nobody sees you do it. And if you do your time, you do your own time. And that's the only way to get by in the penitentiary. If I've learned this through all the years, is do your own time and don't worry about what the other guy is doing, and you'll never have to worry about getting knifed or get something stuck in you.
What do you think about the change in prison philosophy today as compared to 30 years ago?
Oh, certainly no one wants to go back to the day and age where they're going to strap people over these gray mirrors or whatever you want to call them and whip them. Certainly no one wants to agree with that. But I think we have to come back and take a little look at some of the things that happened in the 60s and 70s and be realistic in what you can and what you can't do with the inmate population you're dealing with. Everyone certainly agrees you have to have programs and do things to try to redirect one's behavior. But I don't think you need to go along with a giveaway program, just look in your pocket and see what else you can give them today, because that's never been proven that it worked. And the only thing it causes you is more problems. This is just my opinion, but I think you need to be realistic, and I think you have to be humane and provide humane facilities. And I don't think the courts have been all wrong coming in and looking at them. I think it forces the legislatures, and I think it forces some people to fund and make sure that you have adequate resources to handle your problems. But I think you need a balance between the two. Certainly, we don't want to go way back to where we were in the 40s and 50s, and we don't want to go back where we were in the latter 60s and early 70s. There was turmoil all over the country, a lot of civil rights movements, a lot of unrest. I think we need a balance, and I think we're steadily approaching that field now.
I think we've got to look to the future. In the future, if I read the papers and understand kind of what's going on, they've kind of set a time bomb into the system, in my judgment, by giving the long sentences now. 10 years down the road, you're going to find these people in there without hope. And hope is the oil that makes the institutions run.
Institutions are just an extension of society. What happens in society with the drugs or homosexuality, it's going to happen in the prisons. We don't have control on the intake, nor do we have control of the people that goes out. As Warden Patterson states, the more and more stringent sentencing laws that we have, the more and more people for longer and longer terms. We are going to have to, someone's going to have to address a problem, either change laws, build more facilities, or have some more diversion for the people that we're going to get, because we cannot continue to grow at the rate we're going. Even with the new facilities, with a projected spending of approximately $93 million, we'll still be in the hole. We're losing about an institution a year. We're going in the hole of about 850 inmates a year. So who answers this problem? It has to be our legislature.
Following an escape attempt on July 16, 1951, 5 convicts involved in the escape were whipped. On May 19, 1952, Warden Roy Best and 8 others were indicted and suspended for violating the civil rights of inmates. As a result, the governor abolished physical punishment in all Colorado institutions. Warden Best and 8 others were acquitted in July of 1952. Even though Warden Roy Best created beneficial and innovative changes in prison and was acquitted of all charges, he was suspended in 1952. His suspension was to last 2 years. A few days before being reinstated, he died of a heart attack. Prisons, inmates, and prison philosophy, like the old gray mare, ain't what they used to be.
What's the toughest job in prison?
Well, naturally, I think mine.
It must be a heavy responsibility. You don't show it.
Nevertheless, it's always with you.
I'm getting out of here next week.
Congratulations. Where do you go?
To Denver. My wife will meet me at the train. She's waited 12 years. Stuck by me in spite of everything. Hey, look. When they press the coat, don't let them put a crease in the sleeve.
What's your name, son?
Carl Nova.
And how old are you?
14 years old.
What crime were you convicted of?
Murder.
What's your sentence?
20 years to 30 years.
Let's ask this old-timer a few questions. What's your name?
Joe Bondi.
Been here long?
Quite a piece. Since 1897.
50 years. Aren't you about due for a parole?
They can keep it. Where would I go? Who'd want me? That's the worst punishment of all. When nobody wants.